Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel today. Today I have a layout that I made for the monthly challenge, Stretch the Sketch. In Stretch the Sketch, we take a 12 by 12 inch sketch and we either stretch it to a larger format or we shrink it to a smaller format. A while back, I took a wonderful class with Janet Fritz from Galaxy Girl Creations. Janet Fritz is also the organizer of Stretch the Sketch. When I was taking that class, I started making a 6 by 8 inch album, and this album is really about me. The vast majority of my scrapbooking is about my children and their life experiences, but I also love the idea of creating an album about myself to pass on to my children. When I was taking the class, I was concentrating on the journaling part. I wanted to tell my story, and I knew that I could always go back later and add some scrapbooking layouts. So that's what I did, and today's layout is about my education. I'm starting off with a photo, the one on the left. That's a photo of me before my first day of kindergarten. I didn't go to preschool, so that was literally my first day of school ever. The other photo is of me just from a couple of years ago. I went back to school to get a certification in English as a new language, and that was really just because I got a grant to attend school for free, and I really wanted to take advantage of it. I wanted to learn something new, and so I took a photo of myself holding my certificate in front of the school that I went to. So I thought that this would be a good way of showing how education has spanned my entire life, and I'm still not sure if I'm done going to school. So getting to the layout, instead of having the 4 photos that are in the sketch, I reduced it to 2 photos. I had a whole bunch of photos of me on my first day of school, but I decided that it would, number one, be too many photos on the page because a 6 by 8 inch page is so much smaller than 12 by 12. And then also, I didn't feel it was necessary. I thought just the 2 photos, one from the beginning and one from a more current time period, would tell the story. You could see the influence of the sketch in my layout, but it kind of takes on a life of its own. I find that with sketches, sometimes I'll follow them as closely as possible till the end, and other times they're more of a jumping off point, and that's what the sketch was for me in this particular layout. I looked through my school papers and embellishments, and after looking through it a while, I kind of created a theme. I wanted to use embellishments that had some red and some black or some blue on them. And I also didn't pick out the ones that were more geared for younger children. I picked out ones that looked like they were, I guess, a little more old-fashioned. And I don't know the manufacturer of the majority of the elements on the page. There's a little arrow that I'm placing down the layout now. It says just the facts, and then I'm also going to put the circle that's off to the right on the layout. Those are both from Basic Gray. The rest of the embellishments are from some cut apart sheets and from some tags that, like I said, they were in my stash, but I don't know who made them. I want to make a mixed media background. When I am making a large cluster and I know I'm going to put some mixed media in the background, I like to assemble it on a scrap piece of paper rather than on the background of the layout, and that makes it really easy for me to remove the photo cluster and then do the mixed media. It also helps me to position the cluster where I want it, and then I know where to put the mixed media when I'm ready to do that. There's a tag on the bottom. It's facing downward, and that tag is so old. It looks kind of dated on its own, but when it's mixed in with all the other elements, I don't feel that it looks as bad as it looks when you see it mixed in with the other elements that it came with. I was so happy to get that tag scrapbooked. Sometimes I think, why do I save all of these things? Will I ever use them? And that reminds me that you never know when you're going to need something. I'm very good at getting rid of things around my house that I don't need, but I am not good at getting rid of scrapbooking supplies for that reason. I always think I might use it one day. I'm going to put some mixed media on that white piece of paper. I'm going to mount it on a piece of pattern paper, so I cut it a little bit smaller, but then I realized that I didn't know how big to make the pattern paper. I could have measured it, but I decided to just piece those little scraps back together and I figured out how big the piece of black pattern paper should be. I put some gesso on the background, and now I'm using my pencil and I'm tracing around the cluster, and I'm not tracing at the edge. I'm angling the pencil and making sure that the lines that I draw won't be visible from the front. So now I'm starting to add my mixed media. I'm using a Tattered Angels Glimmer Mist. It's called Blue Raspberry. I'm using the packaging technique. I have a little piece of packaging, and I know that there's only going to be a little bit of mixed media visible behind the cluster, but I do actually end up adding a decent amount of mixed media to this little tiny background. I'm not used to working on a background this small. I do really love, though, the way the layouts come together so quickly on this smaller format. I didn't want the sprays to go to the edge of the paper, so I used a wet paper towel and I was able to lift up some of the color. Now I'm drying the whole background with my heat tool. Then I go in with a second layer of color. For the second layer of color, I used a different Tattered Angels Glimmer Mist. This one was called Blue Ribbon. And I liked that color, but I thought it was just slightly different from the color that I was looking for. I didn't mind having a little bit of it on the background. So when I go back in with splatters, I just use the blue raspberry color. Then I dry this layer of color, and now I'm going to add some droplets of water to the background. One of my favorite techniques. I think for this technique, it's important to make sure that you have gesso on your page. It's also important to make sure that your color is dry. And then when you splatter water and remove that water with some paper towel, it makes these really cool droplets on the sprays. And I just really love the way it adds a lot of variation to the background. Now I'm going in with some splatters. I always try to put the splatters around the outside of the large area of color. Of course, they go everywhere. I also want some on the area where I've put the sprays, but I like the way it looks when there are little droplets around the outside. I think it transitions the large area of color into the white background. And then I wanted to add some white splatters to the background, and for that I use some watered down white acrylic paint. I also wanted to add some splatters of black paint. I wanted to have some really small splatters, and I find that when I use my scissors and tap it against the base of the straw, that the splatters are very tiny. I got a few too many splatters in the lower right-hand corner, but I didn't get enough splatters in some other areas where I wanted them, so you could see that I'm adding some more and dabbing some paint on with the straw. And then I don't really recommend this. I started spraying in the corner to get rid of some of those extra black splatters. You could really make a big mess doing that. Although if you have gesso in your background, it can be fixed. But I was able to remove the splatters I wanted to get rid of without making as big of a mess as it could have turned into. So then I went back in with a little bit more spray to fill in that area and make the edge of it look a little more natural, since I rubbed against the edge with the paper towel. And then I'm doing all the same steps. I'm adding the sprinkles of water and I'm adding the white splatters, and now I'm happy with the way that that area looks. And then while I was adding some white splatters to the bottom, I felt that I would just add them all around the layout. I don't think you could ever have too many white splatters. Now there were very few black splatters in the lower right hand corner. I didn't want to take the chance of splattering more splatters after taking so much time to remove the other ones, so I decided to play it safe and just use the straw. I dabbed some dots in that lower right hand corner, and then I added a couple more around the rest of the layout. I decided to add some stamping. I'm using this really old stamp. I got this at a flea market and I love it. It's a script stamp. So I added little touches of that using some Staz On jet black ink. I punched a hole in the tag at the top, but you don't end up seeing the hole anyway. And now I am adding some additional black soot distress oxide to the edges of the whole cluster. Earlier on, I didn't mention it, but I had taken the black soot and inked the edges of all of these elements, but I just wanted it to be a little darker around the edge so that the cluster would contrast with the mixed media background. I wanted the edge of the mixed media background to be kind of distressed, so I'm using my scissors and I'm trying to rough up the edges of it. This paper is really thick and it's not so easy to distress, but that's okay because I didn't want it to be highly distressed. So after I had it roughed up a little bit, I took that distress oxide again, and now I'm adding that to the edges. And now this piece of pattern paper, I don't know the manufacturer of this, but I thought it was just perfect for this layout. I found it in my scrap envelope of black and white papers. And I inked the edges of the pattern paper because you could see the white on the side, and I thought it would look better if the sides of the paper were black. So now I'm using ATG adhesive and I'm attaching my mixed media background down to the pattern paper. And I do want to point out that I ran that mixed media background through my Mink machine to flatten it out a little bit before attaching it down to the pattern paper. And now I'm adding just a little bit more distressing to the edge, just bending and tearing and folding in a couple of places. Like I said, I don't want it to look super distressed. At the last moment, I decided that I wanted to add some modeling paste to the background. I'm using another item that I don't know the manufacturer of. I'm really sorry. It's a very small stencil and it has some dots on it. So I'm using some Liquitex modeling paste and I'm adding that to the layout. And I like the way this added just another layer of interest and another texture to the background. And I'm very sorry about my very messy desk. It actually drives me crazy when my desk gets super messy like this while I'm creating. I usually stop and clean it up, but I just kept making the layout in this case. Now I'm going to add the title. The title is going to be Always a Student, and I'm using some basic gray letters. I thought that these letters were just the right size for this smaller layout. And I usually apply the letters off camera just because it takes me a really long time to get them lined up the way I want to. Right now I'm just putting them on, and then later on I'll go back and rearrange them until they're perfectly straight. I added some twine to the tag on the bottom of the layout, and I'm going to put a bow on the tag on the top of the layout. I was going to put a bow on both of them, but because that bottom tag is upside down, there was no good way to add the bow. If I put it right side up, it looked funny. If I put it upside down, it looked funny. So I decided to go with twine. I added some photo corners and some pearls to two of the corners of the photos, and that completes this layout. Here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Please look in the description box. You'll find links to all the other scrapbookers who are collaborating on this monthly Stretch the Sketch challenge. I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I will see you again soon with another video. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.